have the NDC Partnership, who are presenting to us. Last year we were delighted to have Joachim Lecce from the NDC Partnership, who gave a presentation to members about what the NDC Partnership offered in terms of resources and how to get involved with them. This year it's even more important because we are heading towards the submission of NDCs 3.0, so we are particularly delighted to have you here, Guli. And Guli Sabahi is, let me get this right, the Senior Advisor for Climate Finance at NDC Partnership. And she will tell us everything that we need to know about what's on offer and how members of Parliament can get involved. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for your time. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick presentation, and so that we can leave some time for discussion at the end. So for those of you who may not be familiar with NDC Partnership, it's a global initiative, global coalition for achievement of Paris Agreement goals as well as sustainable development goals. So main focus areas for us is, of course, mitigation, reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions. Number 2, enhancing adaptive capacities of countries. And number 3 is mobilizing resources. We support 97 developing countries across regions on accelerating NDC implementation. And this year, of course, and next year, raising NDC ambition and quality, because the countries are in the process of updating and enhancing their NDCs to create NDCs 3.0. They're due in February next year. So there's a lot of work, and we have received requests from close to 70 developing countries. So there's a lot of work that will be done between now, and it's already ongoing between now and February. And I think beyond February as well, as we expect many countries will be submitting their new NDCs throughout next year. We also work on supporting countries and mobilizing finance for climate action and mainstreaming NDCs into development plans and budgets. So the model of NDC Partnership is really to foster collective action. So we bring together all of the representatives from the government. We engage with focal points, ministries of finance and ministries of environment, and of course represent the whole of society approach. And bringing as well non-state actors, civil society organizations, as well as the private sector. And I think for the whole of the government approach, engagement with parliamentarians is very important. So I'm happy we're doing this presentation, as there's going to be more support needed on legal frameworks and laws and regulations, and we have already provided some support about which I will talk in the next slides. So in terms of the membership, I'll go very quickly. We currently represent 133 country members, including close to 100 developing countries and developed nations. We also have institutional members, most, if not all, of MDBs, UN agencies, as well as other key stakeholders from public sector that have one or more governments in their structure. We also represent and have in our membership associate members, including key players like C40 or CPI and many, many others who are working to advance climate action from different angles at different levels. We are governed by the steering committee, which represents both our developed nations as well as developing countries, and our institutional members and associate members. Our current co-chairs are Rwanda and Denmark, and from January, Rwanda will be also replaced by Brazil, because our co-chairs, their term is 3 years, so the Rwanda's term is going to be ending at the end of this year, and Brazil will be coming in as our co-chair representing developing countries. I am part of the support unit, which is a secretariat of NDC Partnership. We're co-hosted by UN Climate Change and also by World Resources Institute and UNOPS. Half of our team is in Bonn at UN Climate Change offices, and half of us are at WRI offices in Washington, D.C., and I'm based in Washington, D.C. So we support countries advance their climate goals. We are country-led initiative. the countries submit the requests that they have to develop and implement their NDCs, and depending on their national context. And we mobilize support directly through our members that I mentioned by providing tailored package to meet as fully as possible the needs and requests of developing countries. Our response rate is probably around 70%. About 30%, one-third of the requests are not met, and many of them relate to development and financing of projects, kind of more of the downstream side of issues. And we're working also to see how we can get more support from our partners and members to also help countries respond to their requests relating to development and financing of their priority projects. We are a neutral broker that helps bring together relevant stakeholders at country level. We engage a broad base of decision makers. The role of parliamentarians is very important, and I think we should be engaging more with the parliamentarians, and we see greater interest from the parliamentarians. So this is really a great opportunity for us to connect dots and to raise awareness about the role of NDCs for the parliamentarians. But I think the most important thing to note here, NDCs are being viewed and will become the economic blueprints for climate and sustainable development and prosperity of countries. A lot of the policies and really implementation frameworks that we need would depend on the legal and regulatory frameworks. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in revising the existing laws and policies, as well as adopting framework, national climate change laws, and other supporting legislative and regulatory instruments in order to support countries with the implementation of their NDCs. So I wanted to talk about the NDC 3.0 Navigator. So one of the, as I mentioned, we engage with countries, we respond to the requests, but we also provide a lot of tools to countries based on collective intelligence that we gather through the work on country level, and through our member work and also support of key stakeholders. We have created this tool that essentially helps countries have a kind of a single resource and a platform where they can go to learn about all of the key elements that they need to consider as they proceed with the development of NDCs. So it's an interactive tool that supports the development of NDCs. It helps raise ambition and accelerate implementation of the next round of NDCs. So Navigator has kind of three parts. The parts about learning, where you learn about the context for NDCs and the tool itself and how to use it. It's very user-friendly. It also has a section on that allows the countries and the stakeholders like parliamentarians to reflect on what are the country's needs and priorities. And once you go through that exercise to identify countries' needs and priorities, it will generate for you the routes and opportunities to ambitious and implementable NDCs 3.0. And I'll describe each of those quickly. And as we talked about the importance of NDCs, right? So NDCs are not there only to, help us achieve the Paris Agreement goals, which are very important, and we're off the track, and there's a lot that needs to be done, both on mitigation and adaptation. But we also want NDCs to help transform the economies, because climate is being mainstreamed into national development plans. So NDCs have that dual role, not just help with the climate action, but also ensure that it's done in the most sustainable way to transform the economies. So ambitious climate action needs to drive transformational change. It needs to include social and economic benefits. It has to unlock finance. at all levels, and we're talking about strategic long-term investments, so kind of moving away from short-term fragmented financing, but thinking, real economy investments, market-driven transactions, investments at all levels that need to come to countries, and we need to use our limited public sector resources to mobilize private capital and scale, and there's a lot of discussion that is happening here in the context of NCQG, which is a new collective quantified goal for climate finance, not just the amount, but who plays what role and how the public sector, MDBs and others could use their resources more efficiently to help mobilize access to the trillions that we need to transform the economies, which will come from businesses, local businesses, international businesses, and investors. And we have, of course, as I mentioned, climate action that has to support other policy objectives on national development and other objectives. Very important is also just transition. I just came from another panel where we were talking about the importance of just transition sectoral pathways. Having those principles in mind, and they're embedded in all of our work and tools, and it has even a section here in terms of how do you think about the just transition in developing your NDCs. And then previous NDCs, of course, provide a solid basis to build from. So this is kind of looking back. What were some of the most significant gaps and challenges? So this is where you can do some reflections, and there are different elements that you can choose from depending on the circumstances of a country that will generate these routes and opportunities to ambitious and implementable NDCs. For example, some of the routes that help countries reflect on their first global stocktake or GST and raise ambitions. Number one, to what extent my NDC is aligned to the Paris Agreement temperature goal. So there is a guidance on that in this tool. Number two, to what extent it's aligned to global goal on adaptation. Because NDCs, national determined contributions, these are contributions of each country towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. So understanding, and many of our countries, of course, in emerging and developing countries may not contribute, to the emissions. But I think it's important to understand to what extent they're aligned, and whether more could be done to further align both on mitigation and adaptation side. Number three, as we discussed, do the NDCs deliver a just and equitable transition? And do they mobilize all of the government and all of society approach? So on all the government side, I think it's important to engage not just with the national governments, but also subnational actors. And in terms of all of the society, all of the non-state actors, civil society organizations, private sector, to make sure that all the voices are represented in understanding what the vulnerabilities are and what are the priorities are, in shaping the NDC of the country. It also identifies support needs and also provides some guidance on what would make a technically sound and transparent NDC. And last but not least, what are some of the considerations that countries should have as they develop NDCs for unlocking finance, with keeping in mind that long-term strategic investments that would transform the economies and unlock investments in different forms. So navigating the next generation of NDCs, so you will see that after the routes, we also have opportunities. So we have guiding questions, kind of reflections on the country context, some of the routes that we discussed. And then the opportunities, we provide essentially strategies, case studies, and guidance and resources on each of those rounds. So I just wanted to give you an example. For example, if you're looking at route number one, to what extent your NDC is aligned to the Paris Agreement temperature goal, the questions to ask would be, how will your country reflect concerns about current and or future greenhouse gas emission scenarios? How will the NDC align with LT-LEDs, which refers to long-term low emission development strategies? So these are kind of longer-term emission strategies, and we need to make sure that NDCs are aligned with those long-term strategies. and how will they align with other national development planning and reporting processes? What key technical content areas for strengthening mitigation targets do you want to prioritize in the next NDC? Number 4, what key sectors will your NDC cover? Any additional sectors? Because NDCs, as we discussed, if they were to be taken as economic blueprints, there has to be, these are the economic kind of almost vision documents also, in terms of what are the sectoral priorities for the country, not just to achieve mitigation and adaptation targets, but also achieve sustainable development goals. And and the last one, what are the different data we need to inform sectoral economy-wide targets, and what are the gaps? So these are some of the guiding questions. You may have other questions as you design your NDCs as a country, or parliamentarians may ask some specific questions, and I will be interested to hear more about what questions you would have if you were to receive a draft NDC, to see, you know, whether it's implementable or it has to include some other not details but foundational considerations that would then help also to provide the necessary legal and regulatory framework in order to implement NDCs, because the next round of NDCs have to be implementable and investable. So mobilizing all of the government and all of society approach, we talked about that. How are you planning to align NDCs with subnational plans and sectoral plans? Have you identified key processes to support the engagement and integration of the whole of government and whole of society in planning and implementing the next NDC? How will non-state actors be involved, and what institutional structures are and should be actively involved in developing and implementing the next NDC? It's kind of a difficult document to develop if you think about it, because you have to have such a holistic view. You need to bring everybody together, and you have to have the right conversations, and all of that needs to happen very quickly. So NDC partnership supports countries in that process, and we are currently received requests, as I mentioned, from close to 70 developing countries. So our partners, such as UNDP and others, they will be supporting countries in the process, but it's a country-led process. And so it would be interesting to hear, from some of your experiences, perhaps, in engaging in these processes already as parliamentarians. Mobilize all of the government and all of the society. I think we talked about that, to ensure effective coordination across government, to integrate and mainstream climate into national development and national planning processes, engaging local and regional governments, and incorporating all voices and ensuring inclusive communication and engagement. And of course, last but not least, also leveraging the private sector. So that's a very important point. Private sector comes not only with capital, they also come with the innovation. They have certain ways of solving, and things have been evolving, so they bring a lot of that expertise, technical expertise, know-how, and technology, as well as capital, and they have their own climate action transition plans. And they have investment strategies for countries, so it's important to leverage that and also see how those could be interlinked and to align with national priorities of countries. So there is a live demonstration. You can go to this website and just use the document, and it's very user-friendly, and you may even see case studies from your own countries. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. There is also invitation to contribute. So we are open to receive case studies, any guidance from countries that have done certain elements well, so that we can share it with other countries. As I mentioned, this website has a lot of already existing case studies. For example, it has also input from the private sector, just as an example, institutional investors group on climate change has provided its guidance on, from their perspective, of what investable NDC would look like, what would be the key elements. So all of that information is available on this platform. because there are so many different documents, you know, and we try to create a platform that will have all of those resources in one place to make it easier for our government teams to do this work in collaboration and supported by our partners and members. And so actioning the learning from the navigator, so it aims to provide information and inspiration. It helps countries identify their comprehensive support needs across you know, sectors and around NDCs 3.0. If countries require further support to action the learning, they are encouraged to take advantage of the partnership's global call. I don't know if the deadline, I think there might be still time for any of those who are listening. But I think most of the countries that we represent are aware of the global call and the deadline, and I think most of them have already submitted on time, so, and we will be supporting them. So I also wanted, so that was on a navigator. Maybe I'll stop and see if anybody has any questions kind of about the tool or about NDC partnership or how we work before I kind of delve more into like legal issues or issues for the parliamentarians. Yes. Should I give you
Thanks, Gali. Interesting presentation. Based on your experiences or the cases that you already have, how much of the, because this is more like an assessment tool, what you were presenting to gauge whether the country's proposals are ambitious enough or they are aligning with the commitments like the Paris Agreement. How much of the outcomes from the assessment has translated into implementation? Because it's one thing to have an elaborate assessment that cannot be implemented, or you find that the country will have, after using the tool, a more ambitious plan that may not necessarily tie with local context, like the desire for local economic development.
So it's a very good question. So local content in this context of the tool, it would be captured by just transition principles and sections. So if you do the assessment of countries' needs and priorities and really take a look at all of those routes and opportunities that are available, if that is done right, because that's how it should be done, right? So we have to think about how to develop the NDCs in a way that would help transform the economy. What is the role of the local private sector? What are the, you know, what are we trying to, what are our industrialization goals? And where we can add value and should be adding value, you know, in our local economy. All of those considerations need to take place at the stage kind of development of NDCs, so that the sectoral pathways, the sectoral priorities of the countries, they reflect those considerations and local content requirements in a realistic way. And because I know, for example, there was a lot of local content requirements, let's say for the oil and gas industry, where some of those local content requirements could not be met at the local level, just the way that the global oil and gas industry worked. So now looking at the renewable energy industry, right, and adaptation opportunities, there's a lot of learning to do, but I think it's important for each country to really determine what are they going to be focusing on in terms of creating that value add in those local value chains, and where the opportunities, real opportunities for local content are. And I think it would be covered by just transition, because if we don't optimize, right, the use of countries' resources to transform the economies, including through local content, then how are we going to be transforming the economy? So I think, and the other thing I point out, I think we now see slowly where NDCs are becoming key rationale for investment decisions. And that's why it's important in the development of NDCs to also have engagement with the financiers and the private sector. so that those NDCs also are more investable and more implementable. And the private sector includes also local SMEs, and not just international large investors, but also domestic private sector. And what are the solutions that they can offer? What is it that they can do on their own that would help also kind of thinking about the local content? How the private sector, existing one and the one that could evolve under the sectoral priorities, could really support the implementation of NDCs. So this link between NDCs and investment decisions is being more and more solidified, but the quality of NDCs drives a lot of those kind of linkages. And so we have to have right conversations with the right stakeholders, engaging everybody who is going to be involved in the implementation of NDCs to make sure that those issues are addressed in the NDC and would help with the implementation. For example, some of the feedback from private sector in terms of what are they expecting in those NDCs. Number one, as I mentioned, sectoral priorities and sectoral pathways. Private sector would like to understand how the countries are thinking about energy and other sectors in terms of not just decarbonization, but also transforming the economy. What are the sectoral priorities? And number two, what are the policy levers? So the countries will need to send signals in terms of incentives and disincentives to ensure that the right type of investments are made, and for example, fossil fuel investments are disincentivized in order to create that market that is needed to implement the NDCs. And I think the NDCs also could send more clarity and assurance about the fiscal and legal stability and the policy coherence. Because the private sector, when they plan their investments, if we're talking about strategic long-term investments, we cannot have NDCs or policies changing, every 4 years or every 5 years, or priorities changing, because private sector and financiers, they make their investment decisions based on the policies and priorities of countries. So we need to ensure that they have stability and coherence. And that's where you see also some of this framework national climate change laws evolving to ensure that some of those targets and policy levers are also are being now elevated to the to the level of the law. So they would withstand political cycles and remain and provide that legal and regulatory also stability.
Guli, thank you very much. Do you want to finish your slideshow and then we can continue perhaps for a few
Sure.
minutes? I know it's slightly over time now.
Yes, sure. So these are the country needs that we get from on enabling environment and policies and laws. So 2/3 of our countries request support on enacting and revising policies and laws. And most of them are in the energy, FOLO sectors, but a lot of them are also not sector specific. It means that they're cross-sectoral. And 1/3 is not supported, particularly in water, buildings, oceans, and coastal areas. And then just the last slide is on some of the things to think about for the parliamentarians, in terms of enacting and revising policies and laws for ambitious climate action. Those considerations that we discussed, some of the framework national climate change laws we discussed, and looking also at international legal frameworks, trades, investments, and tax arrangements to ensure that they really support that transformational change we want to achieve. And also, of course, the general rule of law, enforceability of contracts, enabling environment is very important, and a lot of it is created through law and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite you just to sit down for a couple of, because you've been standing. And this is an excellent presentation. It provides, I think, the basic parameters for NDCs. We do have a few additional points in terms of the engagement for parliamentarians, because for GLOBE as the focal point for the parliamentary group, it's vital that we raise the awareness level of parliamentarians and help them understand how this is a step change in what has gone before. So, of course, every country has an NDC already. It's the document which enables them to build on for the NDC 3.0, but the NDC 3.0 is fundamentally different because it is whole of economy. So as you mentioned, there is the emphasis on the private sector. In our experience, parliamentarians, they require the most hand-holding in terms of helping them understand where the private sector is on these issues. Because we also have the climate transition plans that you mentioned for every sector of the economy, for large corporations. And so where we have had the most fruitful conversations, it's in helping parliamentarians understand where they fit in the supply chain of these large corporations. For example, it may be pharmaceuticals, it may be finance, metals, minerals, because it affects their constituencies. So they may well be exposed. So there's an enormous task in raising awareness levels, in educating, in hand-holding. So that's why for Globe, this is our single most important policy focus for the coming year. And we have just on the last Friday, we launched a partnership with Client Earth and WWF, looking to develop robust NDCs and building them into national framework climate laws. So there's a real synergy with the issues that you have identified. So I hope that we can work together for this wider constituency, because they have not really been brought into this policy design process with the previous NDC. So it does require quite a lot of work. But if there are any final questions or comments, Guli, thank you for being generous for your time. I know we've gone slightly over. No, so if we've exhausted them all, so we will be making, of course, this video available. There are colleagues who are joining us online, and it will be there as a playlist on the Globe YouTube channel, and we will be coming back to you with a formal proposal for engaging with you to serve the wider parliamentary community. So please join me in thanking Guli very much for her presentation today. Thank you very much for your questions.